Welcome back to Citizen Earned. Last time we covered what it means to be a militia member. Now we have to cover basic firearm safety. This in part is due to the fact that there are so many more first-time, brand new gun owners who might not be specifically exposed to gun people or the gun culture, where as of late, maybe in the past decade or so, gun owners have really stepped up their game when it comes to safety. So let me be your buddy. I'll show you how to get through this safely. Now, these 4 basic rules of firearm safety have been in development since the first Chinese person put spark to black powder almost 1,000 years ago. They did invent black powder after all, and it wasn't until much later someone stole that black powder and changed it into firearms today. These rules were distilled and codified and created into the 4 basic rules of gun safety by the NRA in the 1960s. They have since dropped it down to 3 rules. And as time goes on, throughout this episode, you'll see how different people adapt the rules in different ways. The NRA also created the Eddie the Eagle program in the 1960s. This is for youngsters, from toddlers to small kids, and maybe up to like 8 or 9 years of age. The basic message is stop, don't touch, leave the area, and tell an adult. Simply to keep kids safe. Whether you like or support the NRA or not, please use the Eddie the Eagle program with children if you have little ones running around and there is a gun in the house. Together, using this program, we can save a lot of kids, we can keep a lot of accidents from happening. Until a better option comes along, it's probably our best option and we should use it. Let's all stay safe. Now, I've been in the gun culture for quite some time, and as I've gone through training and listened to different people adapt the 4 rules of firearm safety, I myself have come to split them into 2 sets of 2 rules. As a gun owner, there's an awful lot of stuff to keep track of, and it might be overwhelming. So that people only have to remember 2 rules to keep themselves absolutely safe. If these rules are adhered to at all times, there should be 0 accidents. Let me explain how I break them down. Ta-da! Okay, so the 4 rules of firearm safety. The 2 basic rules. The first rule that always has to be adhered to is treat all guns as if they are loaded. It doesn't matter whether this gun was just confirmed to be unloaded and safe. If we always treat a gun as if it is loaded, then these things will follow. Assume it is a dangerous object, treat it with respect, and we will always avoid accidents. The second rule is keep your finger off the trigger until you are ready to shoot. If we treat guns as if they're loaded all the time, and we make sure to never engage the trigger on the gun is the only thing that can make it discharge, then we're always going to have respect for the firearm. We'll always be focused on where to point it and how to handle it, because it might be dangerous. And if we happen to slip up, because we're humans and we're not perfect, and we point it at someone, or we drop it, or something scares us and we tense up, then having that finger off of the trigger will make sure that it doesn't go off when it's not supposed to. And then, once we get into training or possibly carrying a firearm, possibly even on a daily basis, or having that firearm for home defense, or whatever the reason is for the firearm ownership, then we get into the 2 additional rules. If we just remember these, you're gonna be safe. If you also remember these, that's kind of the next level and the next step, and you're gonna be even safer, right? Okay. Those 2 rules are never point the gun at something you don't intend to injure, maim, kill, destroy. Lots of different instructors like to finish this sentence with many different words, so I just kind of listed all of them. For the record, I know we don't point guns at things to injure them. We don't point guns at things to maim them. The only reason to point guns at living things is to kill them, or We point guns at targets and other fun things to shoot, to practice shooting, to destroy them. So in reality, if I'm being honest, I should just put kill and destroy on there. And then the last rule is know your target and what's beyond it. This is always important, and that is why it's part of the 4 rules of firearm safety. But I also classify it under the more section of the 4 rules, with these 2 grouped here and those 2 grouped there, because it is extremely relevant when one is carrying a gun. Say concealed carrying a gun or in a house for defensive use. If I don't practice how to defend my home with a firearm, and there is a home invasion or there is a reason to use a firearm, and I'm walking through the hallways looking for bad guys in trouble, and I get surprised because I'm not trained and I'm not inoculated to stress, I might shoot the wrong person. Maybe a family member. Or maybe the person that is in my house is not a threat and does not satisfy the criteria for self-defense. Maybe the person is drunk and they just stumbled in or crashed through the window. To the residents of the house, that will be terrifying. But that person is not necessarily a threat, and so using lethal force is not justified. Or, let's say it is a threat, and I do engage that threat, but I end up shooting through that threat or through a wall and hitting an innocent person. I'm still responsible for that bullet all the way until it stops, right? So I have to make sure to know my target, what's beyond it, what's next to it or beside it, and in the case of being out in public, what might be in front of it or running in front of it. Let's say a mass shooting and people hear gunshots. There will be panic. They will start running. And if you are in a position to be able to engage the shooter and eliminate the threat, you have to pay attention to the whole scenario, not get tunnel vision and not focus on just the shooter, because somebody might be running in front of you. So as you see, this is why I group them into basic and more, because basic is every single time, and these 2 are every single time as well, but they come into play as we progress into responsibility with firearms, and we start to carry them and have them accessible in other areas that have higher risk. So, let me practice. Firearm. No, not a firearm. A Nerf gun. But it still looks like a gun. So, I'm going to practice the 4 rules of firearm safety with my Nerf gun. So I'm going to treat it as if it is loaded all the time. That means I'm going to keep my finger off the trigger until I am ready to shoot. So I can walk around with it like this and notice that I'm not touching the trigger, and this is safe. But if I do want to grab the grip, then I'm going to make sure to put my trigger finger not just forward of the trigger, not just forward of the trigger, not just higher, but ridiculously high. And I'm doing this, I'm stretching this trigger finger out to keep it as far away from the trigger, because I want to make that intentional commitment in my brain to keep my finger off the trigger, because I want to think all of the time, where is my muzzle pointed and where is my finger? And I want to be very intentional. Then third, never point the gun at something I don't intend to injure, maim, kill, or destroy. So I'm going to keep it that way. I am not going to point it at you. I realize that it's just the camera downrange and there's no humans behind that camera. But you're starting to see the point, right? I have to be absolutely focused on firearm safety. So I'm not going to swing this your way. And then obviously know my target and what's beyond it. So obviously you guys can't see this, but there is nothing over in that general direction other than maybe a mound of dirt that could stop a projectile if this were a live firearm. Now you'll find that various organizations maybe phrase these differently, but at the end of the day, the idea is to make sure that if the firearm is to be discharged, it is intentional, and that the person who is discharging it can guarantee 100% where the projectile is going to end up, so that there are no unintended consequences. What is intended to happen with the projectile ends up happening with the projectile. Sorry I'm harping on this so much, but this is really important stuff. I can't tell you how many people in gun stores or supposedly gun people I've been around that somehow find it okay and excusable to ignore some of these. They'll want to show you a new firearm that they got and point it right at you or hand it to you muzzle first. And that's just not okay. So let's help each other stay as safe as possible. Notice that nowhere in here does it say engage the safety or pay attention to the safety of a gun. Gun safeties are there to keep the firearm from accidentally discharging while it is being carried. Focusing on the safety and forgetting some of these rules is a surefire way to have an accident with a firearm. So place the emphasis on the rules, the trigger discipline, the muzzle control, as opposed to worrying about when and where and how to use a safety. Sorry, technical glitch. I'll get it right this time. So the instructor will go over the safety of that specific weapon system that is being trained in that class. With the 4 rules of firearm safety, absolute safety can be guaranteed. And so don't worry so much about the safety until that training class with that professional instructor. So I'm going to go over how to make 6 different types of common firearms safe by using the 4 rules of firearm safety. The first one is a semi-automatic pistol. This is a Glock, and they are next to near ubiquitous. I'm going to make this gun safe by following the 4 rules of firearm safety. Number 1, treating all firearms as if they are loaded. I don't know which configuration this particular firearm is in, so I'm going to make sure that it's pointed in a safe direction and that my finger is off the trigger and as high as possible away from that trigger. You can actually see the trigger in there and nothing can possibly touch it. So no matter whether this gun is in a loaded configuration or unloaded, there will be no accidents with this. First step is to eject the magazine. Oh, and look, it is loaded. It has live rounds in the magazine. Let me show you the other side. Now, in order for me to show you the other side, I have to turn around. But remember, rule number 3, never point at anything you don't intend to kill or destroy. So, you are watching me. I'm not going to take this firearm and spin it this way, pointing at you. I realize that I'm pointing at a camera and that there's no one behind that camera, but I'm still going to practice all of my gun safety rules. I also can't point it up because I'm in a house and there might be someone above me. I can't point it down because I'm in a house and there's a basement and there might be someone below me. But there's no one behind this wall behind me. There's just a wall of dirt. So, finger off the trigger. I'm going to spin around. So, magazine release is right here under my thumb. If I hit this, the magazine will drop free. First step, hit the magazine release. Magazine comes out. Yes, it is still loaded, so it's a good thing that I'm treating this as a loaded firearm. And so here is something that a lot of inexperienced folks do. Remember, rule number 3, don't point at anything we don't intend to kill or destroy. Then my next step is to rack the slide back so that I can look at the chamber and the magazine well and make sure that the gun is empty and safe. In order to do that, I have to grip the slide and I have to pull it back. sometimes is a little bit difficult. So if I reach too far forward, if I go in front of the muzzle, if I reach in front of the muzzle, I could possibly point at myself. I don't want to kill or destroy myself. So I have to pay attention. What I do here is I'm going to grip the back of the slide. I'm going to pull it back, hold it, pull it back, use my thumb to push with the slide release up, hold the slide release up, release the slide so that it will engage with the slide lock, slide release. By the way, if you want to get pedantic about whether it's called a slide lock or a slide release, you're dumb. That will retain the slide in a safe position, and then I can let go of the slide release. So it's going to look like this. Grab the slide, pull and hold, push the slide lock / slide release up, slowly let go of the slide, and then I can let go of the slide release, slide lock. Now the slide is held open. So I can visually inspect the chamber and the magazine well. I can also do it from the bottom and verify that there are no live rounds in this firearm. I can also, with my handy dandy index finger, physically verify by poking it in there. That way I can tactily, with my finger, with my sense of touch, verify that there is nothing in the chamber or in the magazine well, and this is a safe firearm. I will then leave the slide locked back in this configuration so that if anybody else walks by, they can also verify that indeed the gun is safe. Next up is the revolver. Rule number 1, treat a gun as if it is loaded. Rule number 2, finger off the trigger until I'm ready to shoot. To make this gun safe, I have to depress the cylinder release or cylinder lock on this side of the revolver, and then with this hand, push it out this way. We started here so that I can show you the trigger finger off the trigger until I'm ready to shoot. Spin around. Now, I'm gonna hit the cylinder release, depress it, keep it depressed with my other hand, reach behind, pop the cylinder out. And now I can verify that this gun is loaded. It has live ammunition in the cylinder. To remove that, I'm just going to tip it back and it should fall out. I'm going to put the ammo, the live rounds, in a safe location away from the firearm, and I'm going to leave the cylinder out. Next up is a pump action shotgun. To make this safe, I would remove this and put it safely to the side. So with a pump action shotgun, if it is loaded, the cocking grip or mechanism will be locked in place. So if I am able to pull it back even a little bit, I know that it is empty. However, we're going to verify that because this is about gun safety. There will be no assumptions, and I'm treating all firearms as if they are loaded, keeping my finger off the trigger until I'm ready to shoot. If it were live and the cocking mechanism is locked forward, I would have to depress this little button to unlock it. I'll show you that in just a moment. But I'm really paying attention to keep my finger out of the trigger well. So, depress the little lever if I have to, then pull the pump back. And here you can see there's a 12 gauge round sitting in there. I could dump it out this way and then put it to the side safely. Now I have to rack it forward. And again, depressing the button because now it's locked and cocked, even though it doesn't have anything in there. Depress the button, pull another round out. Since I'm being careful and keeping my finger out of the trigger guard, I could do this, if I wanted to do this quickly, I could just load that round into the chamber, turn the gun upside down, and drop the loaded rounds onto the floor. And I can just empty it that way if I wanted to be really fast. You can also go slowly, dump it out, or catch the rounds as they come out and put them to the side. Remember, this entire time, we have to follow rule number 3, which is to not point the gun at anything we don't intend to kill or destroy. So if something isn't working and it requires you to move the muzzle around and you're getting frustrated, take a breath, think about what's going on, and make sure to maintain all of the rules of firearm safety. Again, just like with the pistol and the revolver, I'm going to leave this open so that anybody walking up can verify that indeed it is safe. Of course, the problem with quickly ejecting all of the rounds that are in the magazine tube of the shotgun means that now they're all over the floor. So now I have to go looking for them and pick them up so that I don't trip and fall on them through the rest of this video, because safety is important. Which is why the first demonstrated method to catch the rounds, although it is slower, might be a little bit better because you do retain the ammunition throughout the entire process. Also, please note, even though the rounds dropped on the ground, they didn't go off. They're not bombs. In fact, ammunition is extremely stable, and it is next to near impossible to get ammunition to detonate by falling. So if you happen to drop a round, it's not the end of the world, it's not nitroglycerin. So next up is a bolt-action hunting rifle. Let me remove the bolt and show you. This is the bolt part. In order to make this safe, I'm going to follow my 4 rules of firearms. Treat every gun as if it is loaded. Second, keep my finger off the trigger until I'm ready to shoot. 3, it's going to be pointed in a safe direction. And 4, know my target and what's beyond it. We're not shooting, so it's not exactly relevant, but let's not forget it. Next up is I'm going to cock the bolt up. This actually cocks the firing pin. I'm going to pull the bolt back so that I can look at the action and the magazine. I'm going to use my index finger and I'm going to verify that there is no ammunition in here. Now I know that it is safe. And I'm going to leave this open so that anybody walking up can also quickly verify that indeed it is safe. I should also mention that storing a rifle in this configuration might not be the healthiest for the rifle because the firing pin is cocked. That means this spring is under tension. And if a person isn't shooting every day, that means this spring doesn't get exercised all that often. So many people prefer to store their firearms with no springs under tension. In order to do this with a bolt action, most people close the bolt, lock it down, and then dry fire. They pull the trigger. If you don't want to do that to your rifle, there is a method to do it that doesn't require dry firing. That method is, with the bolt in the up configuration, you use your pinky or your ring finger. Pull the trigger. Now we're violating rule number 1, right? Pull the trigger and slowly let the bolt down. You can kind of hear the clicks and clacks as it goes through its motion, but it means that the firing pin isn't going bang. It's slowly being pushed forward, slowly relaxing the spring. This should not be done if there's ammunition in the chamber or in the magazine, for many reasons. To do that, I had to violate rule number 2. But I followed rule number 1, and I followed rule number 3 and 4. This is why there are 4 rules to gun safety. There's lots of redundancy, so that if at one point someone forgets to do one thing, there are many other safeguards in place. And if we follow those safeguards, we're going to save a lot of lives. 1. Treat all firearms as if they are loaded. You can actually see that on this one through the loading gate, that there are rounds in here. So I can confirm that indeed this gun has live ammunition in it. So it's a good thing that I'm following rule number 1. Rule number 2, keeping my finger off the trigger until I am ready to shoot. A lever action is called a lever action because it has a lever. In order to cycle the weapon system, I have to move the lever forward and backwards. That's going to move the bolt back and forwards, and in the process, take a round from the magazine tube and load it into the barrel. This is the magazine tube, and this is the barrel. Very similar to a shotgun, even though I'm using my left hand with a shotgun pumping back and forth. With a lever action, I'm going to use my trigger hand. I have the option of loading it into the chamber and popping it out. But then I have to go run for it. So I'm just going to rock it forward. So that I retain my ammunition. Okay, now it is empty. No more ammunition in the magazine tube. Verified. Nothing else is coming out. Now I can take my trusty index finger and verify physically, mechanically, that indeed this gun is empty and safe. Just like with the others, I'm going to leave the lever forward so that anybody else can verify that indeed this gun is unloaded and safe. And last but not least, a big, black, scary assault rifle. Yes, it is an assault rifle, which is different from an assault weapon. And there's no such thing as an assault weapon, because anything that's used to commit an assault is an assault weapon, whether it be a firearm or a wooden spoon. But there is a definition for what is an assault rifle, linked down below, and this is one. This is actually a battle rifle. This is an FN FAL. It is not an AR or an AR-15 or an AR-10, and in those cases, AR does not stand for assault rifle. It stands for Armalite, the Armalite 15 or Armalite 10. However, this FN FAL has all of the same controls and same features that any AR-15 or AR-10 has. So I can still use it to explain how to make these firearms safe. Again, rule number 1, what is it? Treat all guns as if they are loaded. Rule number 2, what is it? Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Number 3, what is it? Don't point at anything you don't intend to maim, kill, or destroy. Rule number 4, know your target and what's beyond it. So the first thing to do with this rifle, after I've reviewed my 4 basic rules of firearm safety, I'm going to grab the magazine, and down here where my thumb is, I don't know if you can see that properly, I'm going to hit a button that's going to release the magazine and allow it to rotate. You hear that click? That's that button engaging. So I'm going to press that button and I'm going to rotate the magazine forward. Oh look, it's a good thing I followed rule number 1 because the magazine was loaded. On an AR-15 or an AR-10, the button will be on this side in the back and the magazine will drop straight out. It won't rotate out. It'll just come straight out. Let me show you. Keeping track of rule number 3 and making sure that I'm not pointing at anything that might be in danger, I'm going to spin around. Okay, so that button, the magazine button, is right here, which I push and then rotate the magazine forward. For an AR-15 or an AR-10, I'm going to hit a button here and it's going to drop free that way, removing the magazine and removing ammunition from the firearm. Again, on this side, the next step is I have to verify that the chamber is empty, and to do that, move the bolt backwards and catch it on the bolt lock, bolt release, just like I did with the Glock. This button down here is the bolt lock. So I am going to make sure that I don't put a finger inside the trigger well. Trigger well is right here, no fingers inside the trigger well. Pull the bolt back, push the slide lock, slide release up and hold it. Slowly release the bolt, still holding the bolt release, bolt lock up, and the bolt will hold itself. Then I can release the bolt lock, bolt release. Now the bolt is locked back, the chamber is exposed. I can visually verify the chamber and the mag well and physically verify the chamber and the mag well, and now this firearm is safe. Just like before, I'm going to leave it open so that anybody else walking by can quickly identify that indeed it is safe. Let me do that from the other side. So the bolt is down, my fingers are out of the trigger guard, the button, the bolt hold, bolt release button is going to be pushed. I'm going to pull the bolt back, keep that button pushed up, slowly release the bolt. The button's going to hold the bolt and then I can release the button. Having covered the 4 rules of firearm safety and how to apply those rules and make most commonly found firearms safe, it's time to look at education, training, and practice. Ta-da! So, education is learning about something in a video article, book, or some other way of getting information and knowledge, theories, or ideas into one's brain matter, the grey cells, as Poirot used to say. Training is learning something while someone else watches you. So it's taking that stuff that's in your brain that you soaked up from that external source and putting it, manifesting it into reality, making your body do what your mind understands while someone else is watching you. And that's a really important part. Someone else has to watch you. Because as humans, we're not very good at pushing outside of ourselves and watching ourselves from a third perspective or a third point of view, like a ghost would. We're kind of stuck in this body, this meat sack. And so what we think we might be doing versus what we're actually doing might not be the same thing if we don't have that feedback from the third party, from the trainer. That trainer is the person that knows more than I do, or you do, or we do. And so they're going to give us feedback on how well we're taking that stuff in the brain and putting it into the hands. And then practice is repeating that training on my own time. So I'm going to educate myself, or I'm going to get educated. I'm going to learn about something. Then I'm going to verify whether I have command over that learning by going through some training and having an expert or someone who knows more about this stuff provide me some feedback on my brain space. Then, after the training, I'm going to practice. I'm going to come home and I'm going to practice that training to make sure that I got the brain into the hands and I don't forget. Yeah? Okay. A point of clarification. Education and practice is no substitute for training, because the third person isn't there to do the evaluation and provide the feedback. Something else that should be said is how to evaluate whether a trainer is a good quality trainer with experience and the proper accurate information, or whether it's all a bunch of hocus pocus and snake oil. The easiest way for me to evaluate whether a trainer is teaching something worth learning is that trainer will take the time to explain why he or she says to do something. They might even share an anecdote of where and how they learned to do this, which might be a training school or an actual experienced event. They will also be able to point out other methods of doing it and explain why they prefer to do it their way, or why they are teaching it their way. So with that evidence and a logical explanation why they are teaching certain things, the student can evaluate them as being a good trainer or a bad trainer. There are also resources like firearmtrainingcentral.com and various other websites, not to mention Google, so on and such forth, with reviews, which provide valuable feedback for the student. Just like with anything in life, as I covered in the First Amendment episode, evaluate the information that you are getting and find the sources and the evidence behind what people are saying. So the landscape of firearm owners has changed significantly, and I have to take a step back and provide some guides on how to approach firearms in general. Knowing that I am passionate about firearms, in this last year, a lot of people have reached out to me asking me questions that I thought were common knowledge. As a result, I feel that it is necessary to take a step back for just a moment on this episode and provide people a path so that they can safely become part of the gun culture. The path for non-gun owners is to go to a friendly shooting range, rent and shoot as many guns as they are allowed to or as they can afford. The reason for this is to build familiarity. Don't go to a gun store being dead set on buying a particular gun. More often than not, with no frame of reference, a person might not know which gun interfaces best with their hands or their body or the purpose that they're buying that gun for. If it is for home defense, it could, for instance, be bigger and more comfortable and easier to shoot than a smaller gun that might be needed for concealed carry. No amount of reading on forums or online or listening to podcasts or anything else is going to tell a person what works best for them than actually putting hands on that firearm. And if the gun store is friendly and kind and patient, they will work with that person. If they are not, if they are snobs, or if they are trying to push a person to buying a specific type of gun, then maybe it's time to find a different gun store. An easy example of that is women looking for smaller firearms. That's not necessarily always a better idea. A smaller firearm might be harder to hold on to. And if it has the same size cartridge as a larger firearm, the felt recoil will be greater. So it's good to experiment with different guns in the same caliber and shoot them and see what is best for each individual. Once a person has done that, the next step would be to take an intro gun class. This is typically a concealed carry or concealed handguns permit, something of that nature, which will cover the legal and lawful requirements of owning, carrying, and operating a firearm. But there are also basic shooter courses, and that's what really needs to happen, because these tools require some respect. And it is absolutely important to become familiar with those firearms, because not being familiar is simply being dangerous. And we're all about safety and saving lives. Remember, the second is about defense, not about danger. In addition, on the path for non-gun owners to become gun owners, I recommend that they research safe home storage options like gun safes. Let's talk about gun safes for just a moment, okay? This is going to get pretty nerdy, but stick with me because I can save you a lot of money. So, most gun safes, let me draw. Most gun safes are made out of 11 gauge steel. That means the outside container. Okay, maybe not the best drawing in the world. I'm not an artist, but I hope you can get the gist. The point is, most gun safes today, the outside container, so all of the metal that's on the outside here, including the door, the outside edge of the door, is made out of 11 gauge steel. On the inside of that layer of steel, there is typically some sort of material like drywall, some sort of a compressed cement, and then on the inside of that, it's like a covered cardboard. Maybe they'll put like a nice carpet or something covering on there to make it look nice on the inside. And then they build this phenomenal, thick, big steel door with all these locking lugs. Well, here's the thing. If there's only 11 gauge steel on the outside and on the top, then anyone with a proper sized axe can actually punch through here in a reasonable amount of time. Not to mention, a small portable oxyacetylene torch can be used to cut through even faster. So from a security standpoint, any budget-oriented or affordable type safe that looks all kinds of fancy on the inside and has a big thick door is just as safe as a gun cabinet, which is just the outer lining and a simple 2-lug locking door. It'll just have two spars that go up and down. But the gun cabinet will cost $200 and the gun safe will start at $500 or $600. There are some safes that are truly built better. They start off with 8 gauge steel as the outside container and have real cement in between, or have real cement on the inside of that steel container, and then have a second steel container on the inside. Double wall, which actually provides real fire safety as well. So you have 8 gauge, real cement, and 8 gauge. Remember, steel gauges, the higher the number, the thinner the steel. So the lower the number, the thicker the steel. 8 gauge is lower than 11, thicker steel. And being that those safes have real concrete in between them, that often also have real genuine fiberglass or other material types of fire insulation. But even then, a tall stand-up gun safe that might have a fire protection rating is still too tall. And if there's a fire, this is supposed to be smoke, okay? I'll put some flames here. This is terrible. It's a terrible drawing, but these are flames. This is smoke. A tall gun safe will still get into the heat during a house fire, and it will be very difficult for that safe to keep the heat out. So if there are important documents to be protected, it's best to get a fire safe that is short, no taller than 2 feet, and put it in the lowest level of the house to protect those documents. A person typically is better off paying for a gun cabinet at less than $200 per cabinet and paying for firearm insurance against fire or theft or something else than they are to spend $800, $900, $1,000 on a consumer grade gun safe with fire rating. If a person truly wants a top tier gun safe with a lasting fire rating, the price goes up to about $10,000. So let me save you a little bit of money. And if you're not going to get the $10,000 safe, just buy the $200 gun cabinet. There's a lot of safe manufacturers that just got really angry at me, but I got this information from a safe insider. Unfortunately, it's not published anywhere, because then how would safe manufacturers sell more safes at those price points? Believe me or not, doesn't matter. Buy whichever safe you want, as long as you have a safe and a safe place to store guns. That's all that really matters. Knowing all of that, the next step then for a non-gun owner is to make a list of all of the possible supplies that you're going to need. At the very least, a brand new gun owner will need eye protection, ear protection, a range bag, possibly a holster, and some ammunition. And as time goes on, more stuff will just be added. So eye protection is pretty inexpensive. You can find it at any hardware store or any home improvement store for anywhere between $3 and $15. It does not have to be expensive. Let's use the biggest number, $15. Ear protection is about the same. You can use those orange disposable, what we call foamies. They're just foam inserts that plug into your ears. Again, for 95 cents a set or $3 for a box of 10 sets. A range bag is important because most ranges, especially indoor ranges, require a person to bring a gun from their car into the range, unloaded and in a case. Now you can either use the case that the gun came in, or you can use a range bag. It's kind of nice to have one bag that everything goes in, and a range bag does not have to be a purpose-built gun range bag. It can just be an old backpack. Say a JanSport. We all have one of those hanging out in the back, don't we? Now, many guns come with holsters. Some do not, and depending on the application of the firearm, the owner will have to buy a holster that is purpose-built. Concealed carry, it will have to be an inside the waistband holster. When it comes to holsters, there are so many options, and it's difficult to find the perfect holster. I guarantee you, you'll go through 3 or 4 before you find a good holster. So it's always a good idea then when you go take a class, a training class, to ask that person if they have extra holsters for the type of gun that you have. And then you can try different things without having to outlay a ton of money. But I'm going to put on the board about $100 for the holster. Now, ammo, and oh boy, very similar to cars, and the price of the car versus the price of gas, and you have to keep putting the gas into the car no matter how expensive the car is. Ammunition is the gas of the firearm, and oftentimes will cost significantly more than the firearm. Let's take a Glock. At between $400 and $600, the pistol isn't that expensive. But for a first-time gun owner who wants to become a gun owner, to become proficient with that firearm typically takes about 5,000 rounds, especially in the first year of owning that firearm. And that can get very expensive very quickly. So that ends up being about $1,000. So if we tally all of this up, a new gun owner will have to spend this on top of buying a firearm. So it's good to keep those numbers in mind if a person decides to become a gun owner. So if a non-gun owner has decided to become a first-time gun owner, they will have to consider all of this. Once they become a first-time gun owner, their path will be to continue on education. Read, watch, listen to one chunk of information every week. So that's an article, a video, or a podcast to increase one's frame of reference and understanding of firearms and gun culture. There's an inordinate amount of information out there. Much of it is really good stuff, and it takes a long time to become a truly proficient firearm owner and user. It's important to break that requirement into small chunks that can be digested, and the best way to do that is one piece of information a week. The next thing for the first-time gun owner is to continue training. That should be taking at least one class a year. If they started with a CCW initially, then it would be to move on to Fighting Pistol 1, or Home Defense 1, or Fighting Carbine 1, or Fighting Rifle 1, or Long Distance Shooting 1, and then move on to class number 2, maybe next year, or so on down the road. And the absolute minimum requirement for a first-time gun owner would be to shoot 25 to 50 rounds every week of the first year of gun ownership. Now, of course, extending that to the full 5,000 rounds for the first year, that would be best. But absolute bare minimum, 25 to 50 rounds every week. And in addition to going to the shooting range once a week and shooting the 25 to 50 rounds a week, it is absolutely mandatory to, at minimum, dry fire that pistol once every day, 5 days a week, for 5 minutes a day. If you don't know what dry firing is, I will cover it in the next episode, Anatomy of Pew, episode 21. Okay, now at this point, everybody kind of knows this. This is part of the gun culture. This is what people say to do. But then, after year 1, everybody gets complacent. So, let's look at what long-time gun owners should do. Of course, everything that was valid for the non-gun owners and first-time gun owners is also valid for the long-time gun owner. The 4 rules of firearm safety are imperative. They cannot get lax on them. Knowing the difference between education, training, and practice is important. Continuing that education, training, and practice is very important. Shooting is a perishable skill, and it has to be maintained. Their plan should grow to include goals of accuracy and speed. A good goal would be 1 magazine inside of a 2-inch square at 5 yards in 10 seconds. And the follow-up to that would be 1 magazine inside of a 2-inch square at 7 yards in 10 seconds. Either increasing the distance, which effectively decreases the target size, so it increases accuracy, or decreasing the amount of time. So their goals should increase and become more difficult over time. Shooting 1 magazine's worth of ammo into a 2-inch square at 5 yards in 10 seconds, and then at 5 yards in 7 seconds, increasing the distance again to 10 yards, but going back to the original time in 10 seconds, and so on and so forth. Moving further away, going faster and faster, gaining and getting better. And of course, gun owners can't just focus on the firearm. We all live lives, and so we have to maintain balance with family and work and other responsibilities, possibly even other hobbies. Now, what I've explained up until this point can be done in about 15 minutes a day, or a total of 95 minutes a week. If a person can't give that to firearms, maybe they should consider not being a firearm owner, because that's kind of what's required to being a law-abiding, proficient, responsible gun owner. I realize that there's a lot of people that will probably be very angry at me saying that, but that's their right. It's a free country. At the very least, it gives a person an excuse to go to the range and go shoot. Don't view it as a requirement. View it as a responsibility to go have some fun. So I've just dedicated a massive amount of time in great detail to gun safety. Often in the gun community, we hear the expressions, but guns are safe, they're inherently safe. It's people that are the problem. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. So if guns are supposedly so inherently safe, why do we spend so much time on gun safety? And why are we so adamant about being specific and particular on gun safety? I understand that. So let me say something that most gun owners will not. Guns, just like knives, hammers, power tools, and cars, are inherently dangerous. And if we as humans don't pay attention throughout the entire time that we're using them, accidents can and do happen. It's the exact same argument as texting while driving. If we're going to pilot a multi-thousand-pound vehicle at fast speeds, let's say 50, 80 miles, maybe 25 miles an hour, then we are sitting inside of a death machine. If that car hits someone, they will be injured and they might die. Or if we drive that car into a stationary object, we might die. The driver might die. So we have to pay attention. That's why we don't text and drive. And just so, when we use firearms, the firearm rules, the basic rules of firearm safety are there to keep our brain engaged, paying attention to what we're doing. We don't text and handle firearms at the same time. We don't drink and handle firearms at the same time because our mind can't focus on more than one task at a time, and it is simply dangerous. So you see, they are there to deal with the human mind and its ability to get distracted very quickly. They're not there to make the guns any more safer. This whole idea is going to be expanded on significantly in episode 25, Solutions, when it comes to how we deal with gun violence. Now, of course, now that I have said that, there will be some anti-gunner that pipes up and says, and this is why we license the use of cars, because they're dangerous and people need to be trained on how to use them. Why don't we do that or require that for firearm owners? Well, I understand the argument and I understand where the sentiments are coming from, but it's not quite accurate. There's no requirement for a car owner to have a driver's license, just to own the car. We have to have driver's licenses because we drive our cars on public roads along with other people driving their cars on public roads. As a thought experiment, to flesh this out, if a person bought a car and they owned enough property to create their own private road, and they had the car towed or brought to their property, they can drive the car on the private road without a license. It's only when that car leaves their private property and goes onto public property when they need education and training and checks. So to compare apples to apples, a person doesn't need to go through a background check to be able to buy a car. And now somebody's going to be smart and say, yes, you do have to because of the credit check. Okay, but that, again, you're going through the background check to get the financing for the credit check, not to be able to buy the car. If you had cash, you don't have to go through a background check to buy a car. However, we do have to go through background checks to be able to buy a firearm. And so the driver's license is like the carry permit. They provide you the education, the training, and the understanding to be able to use these objects in public. Being that a car doesn't require a background check to be bought, and it requires a license to be driven on public roads. But a firearm requires a background check to be bought, and then also a class to be able to carry it in public. The firearm already has more restrictions on it than the car. And yet cars kill more people every year in the United States than firearms do. So when we compare automotive deaths and we compare gun deaths, I can only see three possible conclusions that we can come to. Either driver's ed is inadequate and standards need to be raised so that those who do operate motor vehicles in public will be safer. Or, conclusion 2, firearms are inherently safer than cars. Or 3, government controls like driver's license and carry permits don't make people safer. They give people a false sense of safety. Because even though we go through these courses, too many people are still dying from both cars and firearms. It's time for us as citizens, as we the people, to take charge of this. Get the information, disseminate the information, and make our country safer. We need to become intolerant of drivers who text while they drive. And we need to become intolerant of firearm owners that do not follow the 4 basic rules of firearm safety. The only way that we all get better is if we all hold each other accountable. Wow, that was a bit of a ride. So, thus far, I've answered for myself the question of why does the Second Amendment exist? How that relates to everyday life, and what is the use case of the Second Amendment? Whose information do I trust? How all of that informs the standard of being a militia person, and now how to be safe while pursuing these standards, all in order to satisfy my oath of allegiance. So in my pursuit to being able to understand this, I've disagreed with a lot of people, and they have pushed me further into researching and understanding this topic. The big misconception that I have discovered is when I ask someone what is the intended purpose of a firearm, they answer, to kill. Now I understand why they do this, especially in the age of Hollywood and entertainment, where the only case where we ever see guns being used is fired at other people, action sequences and blood and guts and people die. But that's not the answer that I discovered as I looked at it. In the next episode, Anatomy of a Pew, episode 21, I will answer the question of what is the actual purpose of firearms. See you then.